This is a video recording of Rohanna Goodwin Smith, longtime Subud member, helper in the Vancouver, Canada region. And Rohanna, I'm going to start out just by asking you, how did you find and come into Subud?
Okay, thank you for having me here, Rahman. Well, as a young, fairly newly graduated nurse, I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, and in my mid-20s, as a fairly new nurse, I decided to leave Toronto and head west. Go west, young girl, go west. So off I went with a friend, jumped over the border, and we ended out in LA. LA was, so this would be about 1968 or so. And we got jobs at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. Were welcomed with open arms, higher pay, and everything was wonderful. So it was one Easter, probably in my first year that I was in LA, that I went to church. I still like to go to church now and then. And I had some kind of an experience that which I can't describe, but I just felt a lot of light. And I got the feeling after that I was supposed to go on a spiritual search. And LA was certainly the place in the 60s, to go on a spiritual search, I learned. And so I'll tell you, I did it all. I mean, I went to anthroposophy, I went to theosophy, I went to Yogananda, and I studied astrology, I did yoga, I kind of did it all, nursing at the same time, and swimming and going to the beach also. But after a while, I would say after maybe 6 months or a year, I began to feel really insincere because I couldn't stick with anything. I had no interest to stick with any of these paths. So what happened from there, I spent 2 years in LA and then felt strongly it was time to go back home to Toronto. I didn't feel like LA was a place maybe to settle down and raise a family. So I headed back to Toronto and was pleased as punch to learn that all of these isms and paths and so forth were right there. We're right there in Toronto. I think LA probably wasn't the place for me. I heard it was a little wild at that, Subud was, I mean, maybe for this conservative Canadian nurse, it maybe wasn't the place for me. So found myself back in Toronto, and I was going to all these little groups. And then this very kind elderly man, he was probably in his 60s, but he was elderly, seemed elderly then. And he told me about different things. And then one day he said to me, you seem really sincere in your search. And there's one thing I haven't told you about. And he brought out this tiny little blue book called The Aims and Basis, I think. The Aims and Basis.
And Purposes.
Aims and Purposes of Subud. I've got it somewhere. He said, so anyhow, I took it and I read it and I thought, yeah, this sounds good. I'll certainly give it a try. And so I found myself one day standing in front of this rickety old building in Toronto, an old Canadian Institute for the Blind building. And this is where I was sent. This was the Subud Hall. And there was a young man standing at the door, and I went up and I said, hello, is this Subud? And he said, Subud. And he very properly, Canadian, very properly, and then he said, I'll take you to the ladies. So he took me to the ladies, and the walls, the walls were paper thin, and the men were doing Ladihan, the women were doing Ladihan. And so throughout my probation time, this was, I didn't even find it strange, which is odd, hearing all this commotion that was going on and in these two rooms. So I did my 3 months and my 3 months probation. And so it was time to be tested. In those days, they tested whether it was correct to open you. And they came back and told me that some of them received yes and some of them received no. And so that I wouldn't be open, that I needed to carry on a little longer. Well, I was devastated. And I remember getting in my car, going for a long, long drive. And then at one point looking sort of over to the seat beside me. And there was, there's a very esoteric book lying there. I don't know, something about white magic. I don't know what it was about that. So I looked at that and I thought, I seem to remember the helpers telling me that maybe it would be a good idea to let go, because I was still going to the esoteric bookstores and loving it all. So maybe I should let go of this book and let go of this type of thing, which I did. And the next time they tested, it was still no. And I wasn't quite as devastated. I was patient. And again, some of them received yes, some no. So the third time was good. And the third time, it was 1971, and everybody had just arrived back from Indonesia from the Congress. So whether that was the reason, I don't know, that it had kind of a full house of Subud members. And yeah, what I think I mainly want to mention is that I immediately coming even to that old rickety hall, as soon as I arrived at Subud and at the Latihan Hall, I felt like I'd come home. It was just so clear. And that's how I came to Subud. 1971's over 50 years now.
So how was your opening or the first Latihan?
It was very nothing over the top. It was, for me, it was just very quiet and prayerful, and I wouldn't call it particularly deep, or I wasn't thrown to the floor or anything. Yeah, but yeah, it was really nothing to that I could, nothing dramatic.
So when did you first feel the Latihan that you could really tell was something special for you?
I think that came kind of slowly. I think I sort of just very gradually moved into the feeling that I was, that it was right for me again. It wasn't anything profound, but yeah, I just continued with a very pleasant experience without describing it too much. But like I say, I just knew that's where I was supposed to be.
Yeah. So how about, have you had much experience of being around Bapak at all?
Not a lot. I think the first time I saw Bapak was in 1976, maybe in San Francisco. And as soon as I saw him, I come walk across the stage. He just felt like my father. I mean, that's the word that came to me was father. He was kind of the same stature as my own father and the same build, but that was how I experienced Bapak, and was it was all quite wonderful. I mean, those were just wonderful. I feel so blessed.
Yeah.
To have been a part of that.
So how did you get from Canada to San Francisco, or that part of the country?
Well, that was where I went, just to get out of, that's just where I felt to go, was California, and moved from So LA first, and then not in Subud, and then opened in Toronto, and then San Francisco, and then I got married and moved to Marin County. I mean, I love the San Francisco group. Oh, and there was this charming young man in the San Francisco group, and I don't know how he did it, but he somehow talked me into buying into this multi-level soap company. It was all new, the whole multi-level thing. And so I don't know what I don't know if I borrowed money or what I did, but so it was called Apollo, and we were going to save the bay by, the all biodegradable, wonderful products. And I never got rich. Did you?
No.
But
So I'm that young man you're talking about. Huh?
You're Rockman Cantrell, aren't you? But it was, when you sent me those photos recently of standing out there with a table and all these soap products and looking very serious. I was looking very serious, and it was a lot of fun, Rockman. So I don't regret it for a minute. I'm surprised I still don't have soap around 50 years later, but I don't. So it was a good product.
That was a time when there was a lot of emphasis on enterprises. And a lot of Subud members were going into different kind of enterprises. There was a lot going on in Marin County, and
Absolutely, yeah, we were encouraged, certainly encouraged to do that, and I was excited about it. And I did join other multi-level companies and never got rich in the following years, but anyhow, that was part of my entrepreneur training.
yes. And so did you learn something from that experience?
Oh my God, you know what? I actually haven't gone there. I haven't spent a lot of time trying to figure out if I learned a lot from that experience, but I think we learn from every experience. So
Yeah.
So I don't doubt that. And we had a wonderful little gift shop in San Francisco as well. Remember that? The Perfect Gift.
Yeah.
That was an enterprise started by Vera Roble, I think, or a few members, and that was just it was all. I mean, I have such fond memories of all of it.
Yeah. I eventually took over that after the regional committee didn't want to have it anymore, so they wanted somebody to take it over, and I eventually became the one to do that.
I think I remember that, and that was kind of the start for you in that.
Yeah.
In that area. Wonderful.
Yeah, I went on to open many stores after that.
Yeah. I remember.
I still have a store here in the Seattle area.
So it's quite an interesting store too. I'd love to wander around in there sometime.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'd find something.
So you were married to, who's your first marriage?
Out of my 5.
Your 5? Wow.
Yeah, no. Robert Jones of Good Goods.
Okay.
Right. So of course he's the guy that all the Subud events smelled like clove cigarettes. He's a guy that imported the clove cigarettes from Indonesia, Bima and something else, and that was and burned holes in people's clothes and so forth. But that I even smoked a little bit myself at that time, and and that's why I moved to Marin and had a couple of children and became a helper with a 6-month-old baby at home. And we were all, in our 20s and late 20s, early 30s, and huge groups. And so that's how we did it. Sometimes I don't think we left the kids on their own, but practically,
Yeah. Is Robert still alive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, actually, when we divorced and I felt to come back up north, and I wasn't ready to come back to Canada, so I joined the Bellingham group, another wonderful group, small. And then he and his partner at the time decided to follow us up, which was wonderful because they were there for the boys, for my sons. So, and he's still there. He's still there on Lummi Island.
And who did he marry someone else then? Or-
Yeah, not a Subud lady. He married he eventually married someone else. Yeah, and then I moved to Vancouver and married Karsten Smith, who was the fellow that was at the door when I first arrived at the.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, which is interesting. So that's a whole other story. I'm not gonna go into that.
Okay.
He was a good guy.
So have you been to any of the World Congresses?
Yeah. Okay. Just remind me I went to Toronto. What was the one? I missed Germany, I think, because I was pregnant at the time. And then I went to Toronto and a few of them after that. I can't remember. England and Australia, and tried to get to as many as I could.
Yeah. And what was your general feeling or experience of those different situations that you can recall?
Well, it was they were all a little bit different, and I'm actually having a little trouble recalling, but they were marvelous experiences, especially, of course, the talks, Bapak's talks, and the testing sessions, and God, I'm so grateful that I had all of that, and worth all the effort to get to the congresses, of course.
Mhm.
I had an experience. I guess it was about 1986, and I was going through a difficult time in my life. So I had a health issue, and I kind of felt like the dark night of the soul that I was in. And I remember calling Renee Goff. Her and I have stayed very close over the years, and they had spent a few years. The Goffs had spent a few years in Indonesia. So I asked her. I just had a feeling. I'd never been to Indonesia. I didn't even think it was necessary. It's kind of an attitude I had that I didn't need to go to Indonesia. I mean, one doesn't really have to do that to experience Saladihan, and which is true. So she said, well, Bapak's 11th Windu is coming up, which is a celebration of his every 11, I guess they're every 11 years. So it was his 11th Windu every 8 years, I guess. And so my family supported me, and so off I went. And after the Windu, which was just so beautiful, the whole celebration was so beautiful with the music and the costumes and the dancing, and then Bapak gave a testing session after the Windu was over, a few days later, and he invited just the foreigners up to the front, just the women that were the foreigners. And I don't know, whether to say I was blessed by this experience or not by being in this, but it was the time, which you may have heard of, is people have said they've only heard Bapak being really angry, maybe twice. Well, this was one of the times. And he asked something like, what is your state in front of Almighty God, something like that. And I recall having this immediate sort of spontaneous feeling to just go down, but I didn't. I held myself up, and I held myself up, and I held myself up. And eventually, the very strange thing is I didn't hear this, but apparently Bapak was hollering hollering at us, bow down before Almighty God. And like just looming across the room. And apparently I heard later that everybody in that room, the people that were watching, they all had their heads down. And then suddenly, it was like I was pushed, maybe by an angel, or suddenly I was down, and without any inclination, knowing that I was going to, I was just kind of flat. And so, and then he's, said something about, indeed, our state is, our
Rohanna, can you hear me? So you were saying about your experience in Indonesia during the testing. Can you continue with that? We had a little break in
little
computer problems. So
technical issue for a while there.
yeah.
Now I'm wondering what I should be saying. So that was kind of the end of the test. And then I guess we pulled ourselves up. Not everybody went down, and and then Bapak was just quite back to normal and carried on with some other, he was, to do a little dance, show a dance of Cordy Blood. And I think what I was saying just before we had our technical difficulties is that I was feeling a little shamed, with kind of some of that receiving. So what I wanted to tell you, there's a bit of I don't know if we can call it an epilogue to the story that I was really surprised to read. And it's something that I read in the book, An Extraordinary Man. Was that Mukhtar Williams?
Yes.
So here was a person giving their experience about being in on that same tests and feeling just lousy, feeling awful about it. And then she was talking to Tuti the next day, and she said, Bapak was hollering at us. And then, as the book says, Tuti said, oh, Bapak wasn't yelling at you. There was a big spirit in the room that he was yelling at to get to bow down. And that it took a lot out of Bapak, apparently, is what she said, to have to do that. So that was just a complete surprise to me. I hadn't heard that. So that was my one and only experience with testing with Bapak. So other than other than group,
So did you ever recover from that receiving?
Well, for me, it had a little bit to do with before I knew the second part, it had to do with something to do with pride. And it was interesting because the next day I was reading a little book, a C.S. Lewis book that I had brought with me. And I'd been reading about how many cardinal sins are there? The 8 cardinal sins or the 7 anyhow. And so the chapter that I turned to, as much I hate to admit it, but the chapter that I turned to that next day was pride.
Mm.
And so there was at least that was something for me. There was something about so I don't know, Rahman. I don't know if I'll ever really know. But that was kind of a little bit of that's what it was that's what it was for me. And I've tried to be aware of that, but it was a pretty profound experience, that's for sure.
Are there any other experiences that you would like to talk about, or in your
I can't really think of. I'm not one that has had a lot of profound experiences, and yet I've never I've never doubted. You know, some people maybe have left Subud because they haven't felt like they've experienced enough, and for me, you know, I mean, there was, as I said before, there was no question. So and I'm sure there are other things that I've just forgotten about that I just can't bring to mind at the time. But yeah, I just kind of carried on, you know, and I think, you know, if anything, I feel like I've maybe not hit the point of surrender that it would be maybe expected, or not expected, but I haven't sort of reached that level after 51 years of Subud and you know, that I just it's so important to me that I trust God, and I trust my own experiences, and
yeah.
and yeah, can't think of anything else, Rahman.
How about your relationships with people? Has being in Subud had much of an effect on that kind of thing with you?
Well, I certainly didn't do that well in the marriage department, but which I regret. I really honor people that have been able to stay with their marriages. I've learned an awful lot about myself through those experiences, and so at this very moment, Rahman, I forget the question. What did you just ask me?
I remember myself. Something about.
Can we edit this part?
Oh, this is the best part. You have to keep that in.
Okay, but my experiences with people, my relationships with people. Yeah, I haven't noticed anything better or worse. I don't think. I may be a little bit more. No, you know, I just kind of do my best, and probably don't always come from an authentic place as far as experience, you know, as far as expressing myself.
How about fear? I've noticed in myself that over the years, my feeling of fear has pretty much gone away for most things. How about for you?
Well, it's kind of always been, I've never been a fearful person, except I'm at this moment in time, I am experiencing some anxiety and fear because of a little bit of what's going on in my life. So, and that's kind of new for me, but I'm not kind of overwhelmed. I kind of sometimes feel like I'm praying all the time, you know. I'm just trying to stay connected all the time, and I just try to give things up to God that I don't think that I can handle. So that's my way of dealing things. But otherwise, I haven't been a person. Oh, I had a dream last night I wouldn't want to tell you about, though. But I'm kind of having these odd sort of. I don't think I think the computer might crash again if I talk about the. It's kind of to do with the world, you know, the world situation, and so it's probably better that I don't express.
Yeah, we're having a difficult time in the world right now with this war in Ukraine. So sad.
Yeah, it's a very difficult time, and you know, Rahayu has said that we're, you know, in the past that we're being tested in, you know, with climatic conditions and so forth. That and what I really kind of latched onto that she said is, she said, don't fall apart, you know. And this was very kind of strong about that. Don't fall apart, because it's kind of all a, you know, a test. So that's kind of hard as trying to make sense, I think, of things. So I really, I feel as I'm getting older that I'm really closer to the next world. Like I feel that it's almost like a promise, you know, like and that I realize it's kind of with us all the time if we just kind of surrender to it and just know that. So and you know, my group, we've had, you know, our group, as the numbers have gone down since the pandemic started, and so there seems to be, I see, for myself, I'm constantly getting kind of new challenges, seem to be constantly getting new challenges and trying to make my way through those. So but I've never, like, Subud is my foundation. I mean, Subud apparently is a way of life, and for me, it's a way of life, and I just can't imagine life without it. And as it gets more complicated, but I'm just constantly astounded by this great blessing that we've been given, and I wonder why me. You know, I often wonder that, but I don't question it for too long.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rohanna. I appreciate your being able to do this.
Yeah, thank you, Rahman, and this was an experience that it would have been easier for me to say no. I don't think I'm comfortable doing that, so I feel like I've kind of pushed through that, and thank you for being such a gracious host.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Bye, Rahman.